Okay, welcome everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is our 76th meeting that we've had in a row. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, and as well as Dennis Speed and Dennis Small, my co-moderators. And as everyone, I'm sure, is on pins and needles right now as you're watching the aftermath of the US election and the various appointments, we're definitely going to have some discussion today on that. If people haven't seen this nomination of Tulsi Gabbard for the National Intelligence, her appointment into the Trump administration has really freaked out the CCD Ukraine kill list, which I'll make sure to share with all of you. So there's some very interesting things going on. But I think the key point is what we're doing in order to unite the peace movement around the world above people's ideologies for true peace, bringing people together of all peace-loving concepts. So that's what we're doing here today, and that's what we're going to keep doing no matter what goes on and what happens. We should not hope and wait and see what's going to happen anywhere. We should be organizing and mobilizing to shape a dynamic. So to start off the discussion today, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and also the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. So thank you so much. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, hello to all of you. I think we are in an extremely interesting moment in history, which can, turn terrible, but it also can become the beginning of a new era. And I think it's not yet decided which of these directions it will go. I mean, obviously, the big subject is the new administration, which will come into office in the United States by January 20 with President Trump. And he is in the process of putting his team together. And I would say, there are some appointments which are not promising so much peace because they are known to be quite hardliners and anti-China, anti-Russia. But there are also, first of all, there is still President Trump who will set the policy, so you cannot read from the previous history of these people what they will do in the future. And I will give Trump the credit when he says he wants to end the wars, that he indeed is going to do that. Then naturally, as you mentioned, Anastasia, some of the appointments are causing, in particular, very heavy reactions among some people in Europe who were betting on Kamala Harris to win, the mainstream media being that. And given the fact that we also in Germany have early elections, which will be on the 23rd of February as of now, I think that the time between the January 20th and the German election may lead to some developments which have not been expected. For example, President Trump then President Trump has said that he wants to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Now, I don't think it will happen in 24 hours, and what is known so far has not found agreement by the Russians. But, we don't know yet what he will propose. And for sure, one can be sure of one thing, with Tulsi Gabbard being the director of national intelligence, the truth about where Ukraine stands will for sure come out, because the mainstream media is still in Europe pushing the line, Ukraine must win, more weapons to Ukraine, more long-range weapons, allowing the Ukrainians to be used for strikes deep into the territory of Russia. The reality on the ground is very different. The Ukrainians are clearly have lost the war already. It's a terrible meat grinder which is taking place. The number of desertions is increasing. And I'm pretty sure that, if that truth will come out in the period between Trump moving into the White House and the German election, it will cause quite a shock in Germany and may affect the election result. It is also not to be excluded that when Tulsi Gabbard is head of the intelligence services, that there may be a different take on who was responsible for the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. And that is I would say, the sticky issue in Germany of any issue, because it is the result of the Nord Stream pipeline being sabotaged. And in that context, eventually all relations between Germany and Russia being cut, which is why Germany has now no more access to cheap gas deliveries, which has caused, in turn, the German economy to be in a free fall. The entire fabric of Germany is disintegrating as a result of that. And if there would be some new investigation or revelation before the German election, I think it would also impact the situation greatly. In respect to Iran, well, one can only hope that the signs could be that Trump may not go for regime change, which is being pushed by some sources. In any case, I do not want to speculate on what Trump will do, because we have to actually wait until he is in the White House. And in general, I don't think that it's our job to just comment on events, but, we are trying to offer solutions of how certain crisis points can be overcome. And there is one obvious area which I think affects both Europe and the United States. Both are affected by a major migrant crisis. Trump has his ideas what he wants to do with that, and the European Union has some other ideas. We want to propose a different approach altogether, because this problem will not go away if you have Frontex involved in pushback operations in the Mediterranean, and the problem of the migrants will not be solved if you build a wall between Mexico and the United States, at least not for the migrants, because they will remain, being, on the refuge of because of war, because of hunger, because of lack of economic opportunities. So given the fact that the strategic situation has dramatically changed since Trump left the White House 4 years ago, the new element is very clearly the existence of the BRICS countries, who just had a summit in Kazan, where 4.7 billion people, representing 57% of the world population, were represented through the 22 countries who are now members of the BRICS. That is clearly the global majority. And they are an economic bloc, which, there is where the growth lies. This is where the rising economic rates are to be found in China, but also in other countries working with the BRICS. So why not take a completely different approach? If the West, that's the United States with the Trump administration, and the European nations would say, we have to do something to alleviate this incredible issue of poverty, of war-torn regions where people cannot live. Why don't we put our efforts together and really go for a massive economic build-up program in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and basically put our capacities together. For example, in Africa, you need electrification for about 600 million people who have no electricity. To put electricity in takes several years, maybe 4 years, maybe 6 years, but you can start right away and keep building obvious projects like the offshore gas, direct production of energy from the turbines on the spot. Then you have certain game changer projects like Transaqua, which would, that takes longer, but it is an absolute game changer for all of Africa, the Inga Dam. In Latin America, it was just now that the APEC meeting took place where Xi Jinping and Biden both participated, but they also, Xi Jinping and the president of Peru, opened the Chancay port, which is the first deep sea, deep water port for Latin America. And it is potentially connected to the bi-oceanic railway, which would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific, and would, basically be the artery for a lot of infrastructure integration for all of Latin America. Likewise, for the Middle East, we have proposed since a while the Oasis plan to create lots of new fresh water, which could become part of a general development plan of the entire Middle East. So if the BRICS countries would join hands with the United States and European nations and would say, let's commit ourselves to overcome the underdevelopment of these countries for where the refugees are coming, so that we build up the economies of these countries who, in any case, want to overcome neocolonialism. That's the whole purpose of the BRICS. And they want to not any longer just be raw material exporters, but they want to become full set economies. They want to have the value chain in their country. They want to become middle-level income countries in the short term, build the education system, the health system, the infrastructure, industry, agriculture, so that there is a reason for the people who are now fleeing as refugees to stay home, have job opportunities, and help to build up their own country. And isn't that what everybody wants? Who wants to be a refugee in a country where they're not received friendly, if there is the opportunity to stay home and build up the own economy? So it would be in the absolute self-interest of the United States, of the European nations, of the countries involved, affected in the global south, to all join hands in doing that. And the argument that it takes too long is not really valid, because it's a question of giving a sign of hope. Because once people would see that there is a serious attempt to do that, and there would be in the beginning, verbal commitment of the leaders of all of these countries that they will make such a crash program, the mood would change immediately. There would be hope for a better world, and it really would end a chapter of colonialism, which is really something we should draw the conclusion and make a more just approach for the whole world. Now, we are not just proposing that, but we will have a big international Internet Chiller Conference on the 7th and 8th of December, where we already are assembling top-level speakers from the Global South, from the United States, from Europe, and other parts of the world. And we want to present this program there in full. Now, in order to make that easy for people to understand, we are right now involved in a crash program effort to produce a preliminary study, a pamphlet, which we hope to have out in about 10 days from now, where we will define those projects, where we are at, what steps need to be taken in order to organize as many forces as possible for this conference. And then in the meantime, we will continue to deepen that study and present something in the near future, like we did with the New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, which was a comprehensive study for infrastructure and development projects for all 5 continents and how to connect them through tunnels, through bridges. And, that is still the standard book for, the expansion of the New Silk Road as a worldwide project. So I'm therefore having the attitude, we may disagree with some of the economic ideas which some of the governments have, and I don't even want to go into the discussion now, but we will present our option, and I'm absolutely sure that since what we propose is so much in the interest of every country involved, that I'm quite optimistic that we can, put this on the agenda in earnest and hopefully start a new chapter in the history of mankind by doing so. So that's really all I wanted to say at the beginning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Helga. No, this pamphlet I'm very excited about. The first one that was done, the Coming Miracle on the Silk Road, was very, very popular. We had a lot of success getting that out in the United States. I'm sure other places as well, but it was a very good pamphlet, and I still use it in my organizing and talking with people. Whatever few I have left, it's all tethered and ripped up, but it's very good. So thank you for that, Helga. Next, we're going to go to Colonel Richard Black, who, if people don't know who he is, he's a regular on the International Peace Coalition, a good friend of ours, former senator as well, state senator of Virginia, and see if I get this right, former head of the U.S. Army Criminal Division at the Pentagon. So thank you so much for joining us, Colonel Black. Please go ahead. Oh, you're muted there, my friend. You're muted, Colonel Black. There we go.
Okay, good. Hopefully, let me get my screen back here. All right, I want to talk a little bit about BRICS this morning, but let me just sidetrack a little bit and touch on the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard. I am very familiar with Tulsi. I was the first American official to sort of pierce the veil on the CIA's attempt to employ terrorist armies to overthrow the constitutionally elected government of Syria. I went to Syria at a very desperate time of the war, and then later, as the tide had turned. I wrote a letter to every member of Congress disclosing what was going on, and I got mixed reaction, but I got a letter from a congressman from Hawaii, of all things, and it was quite a shock to me that it was a dissertation on Syria that was precisely accurate in every detail and showed tremendous insight into what was going on in Syria. She had a totally clear understanding. And I was so impressed by her letter that I did something that I've never done before or since in my lifetime. And I wrote a follow-up letter complimenting her on her precise comprehension of the situation in Syria, which in a nutshell was the United States organizing a massive terrorist army around Al-Qaeda, the same group that flew the jets into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on 9/11. And we formed a tight alliance with them, and Central Intelligence Agency, Pentagon, NATO, orchestrated an attempt to overthrow the legitimate government and install the greatest terror regime in history. And unfortunately, we were able to block it with the help of people like Tulsi Gabbard, who then also went to Syria to examine the situation there. So anyway, that's my word on Tulsi Gabbard. Anyone who just doesn't know about her, she's very bright. She has military experience, and she just has a great deal of insight, and she is not an indoctrinated individual. So that's a very good sign. Now let me just make some remarks about the shifting power in BRICS. We just had in October we had the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. President Putin was the host. There's a rotating leadership of the BRICS. and it was Russia's turn to do it. For the Kremlin, it was a triumph because it demonstrated that much of the world was coming to Russia, that the Western alliance effort to blacklist Russia was a failure, and the rest of the world simply wants nothing to do with that attempt to isolate Russia. The BRICS is an interesting organization. It is a very loose organization and formed in 2006. It was somewhat of a sideshow, I think, for many years, but within especially just the last few years, it has garnered enormous strength, and it is, I think, basically a counterweight to the organizations that are dominated by the West. What we see is, particularly as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, there are varying views on the Ukraine war across the members of BRICS. They're not totally on board with what Russia is doing. But what happened is, going back to Syria now, the United States imposed just phenomenal draconian sanctions on Syria. They cut them off. They devalued their currency by cutting them off from the SWIFT system, which is the international payment system. And they made it impossible for the people of Syria to receive food, to receive rebuilding supplies, to receive vital medication. Women who come down with breast cancer in Syria are simply made to die, not by Syria, but by the Western alliance led by the United States. We imposed this death sentence on sick people by using these sanctions. In any event, the world, that many of the third world countries were not pleased with what went on in Syria. But when it happened to Russia, not only were there all sorts of sanctions, we even forced the crippled children that were slated to go to the Paralympics for handicapped people, and we got them thrown out. So we had literally blind and crippled children thrown out as part of our attempt to combat Russia. But in any event, all of these things began to disrupt international trade between Russia and many countries. They saw that not only as an interference with their trade, but as a very fundamental degradation of their sovereignty. Suddenly you had some nation issuing orders out of the Treasury Department not to do this, not to do that. But I think what really sent shockwaves around the world was when Western banks seized half of the entire Russian national treasury. It was $300 billion, roughly half of what the entire treasury amounted to. And the banks in New York City, the banks in London seized that money, essentially stole it, and then used that money to issue bonds at enormous profit for the banks, and basically to use those bonds as war bonds to pursue the war against Russia. So the Russian treasury was now repurposed to kill Russians on the battlefield. Like I say, there were very wide differences of opinion over Russia's war, with Ukraine, but there was a very deep revulsion and fear engendered by the theft of the Russian treasury. And I think that really began this big shift towards the BRICS by the countries that were frightened because this was all of a sudden the talk of Western values rang very hollow. The reliability of banking relationships suddenly meant nothing, and these banks under the guidance of the U.S. and London committed the largest theft in world history. And that frightened these countries because they said, well, you know, if that can happen to a large nuclear power like Russia, what about our country? So there has been a great loss of credibility in the Western banking system and a revulsion at the infringement of nation sovereignty. Now, I think that the election of President Trump will arrest that slide in American respect, but at the same time, President Biden's participation in the bombing of Gaza with these, you know, very large 2,000-pound bombs has badly stained America's reputation across the world. So in any event, we're going to see some very interesting things. Hopefully, Trump administration will move to shore up its position and draw back from the idea of the unipolar dominance and move more towards a recognition of a multipolar world, and one in which we come across as less threatening and more respectful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Black. That was very, very important analysis, actually, and very much appreciated. I was taking copious notes of what you were saying. So thank you very much for that. It's always useful to have your view on what's going on in the world for this discussion. So thank you so much, Colonel Black. Actually, I wanted to see, I know you have to get going. I just wanted to ask Helga if you had any response or if you had any questions for Colonel Black before he leaves, and then we can continue. If not, we can just continue.
I just want to thank Senator Black.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So next we have.
If you allow me a quick word with Senator Black.
Oh, go ahead, President Donald Ramotar, please. This is President Donald Ramotar, former president of Guyana.
Yeah.
I want to say I shared his enthusiasm, for want of a better word, and the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard. That is when I knew her at first, and her position on many important issues were pretty clear. But in recent times, I saw her position on Gaza, which frightens me tremendously. She was practically speaking the same language as Netanyahu as it relates to the Palestinian and the Palestinian people's struggle. And then I heard her subsequently on another issue that relates to Bangladeshi Hindus who were being kicked out of Bangladesh and so forth. But I tend to, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I strong anti-Islamic bias in her position, which can make her a pretty dangerous person in the Middle East at this point in time. I just wanted to put that into your equation about Tulsi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will just say that what you're going to see from each of the nominees for cabinet positions it's going to reflect President Trump's position. There's going to be a tendency to attempt to articulate his position, but at the same time, and I understand your concerns, and I think they're worth noting, certainly. But I think you're going to find now, of course, Syria, for example, is a predominantly Muslim country, mostly Sunni Muslim, with perhaps 5% Shia, perhaps a little bit more, and I think you're going to find that on her own, within her own realm, that she is not anti-Islamic, but she is a voice for peace. But I understand what you're saying. I respect your observations, and to some extent, we're going to have to see what happens. But I will tell you that she is a voice for peace that will be a very strong one.
I know Dennis Speed just messaged me and said he had some response, a short response. Please go ahead, Dennis.
Mainly because I wanted to do it in the context of Colonel Black's, what he said, and because Helga's here. I thought that your opening evaluation of Gabbard is very important because, as you know, the way she's being attacked, including by Elizabeth Warren and others, is as being in Putin's pocket. This is a combat as a veteran of the military. And you, as a veteran of the military, especially the way that you previously, Colonel Black, introduced yourself on many of the occasions of some of the videos. It's very important for, I think, people outside of America to see or hear from people such as yourself concerning particularly Gabbard and actually what this actually may mean. There's something else going on here. And I just wanted to propose that maybe there should be an interview with you, actually, where that specific area of intelligence, what you had to say about Syria, for example, which many of us know was actually the primary matter around the Flynn case, the case of General Flynn, and his opposition to Obama's and others, right, and so forth. I just wanted to propose that and see if either you or Helga have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I will say that the tragedy of Syria has sort of it's gone off the front pages now that Syria has weathered the storm, but it's very relevant to today's goings on, and it certainly is a peek into the very dark recesses of the Central Intelligence Agency and the CIA's willingness to employ enormous, highly paid, modern armed terrorist armies, not scattered people in sandals, but mechanized divisions of troops. And I am always willing to talk about the situation in Syria because it's such a tragedy. That country is under effectively a nearly total blockade of food, of fuel in the winter, and in fact, there was legislation passed several years ago that simply declared that one of the purposes of this legislation was to prevent rebuilding materials and and we basically left Syria in rubble deliberately in order to basically cause distress to the people, and people literally are dying because of our seizure. We have troops up in the northern part of Syria, and their purpose is to create this tiny rump state that's supposedly a Kurdish state surrounded by nations on all sides and don't agree with that. And but the purpose is to literally to steal the oil of Syria and to seize the breadbasket of Syria, where they produce almost all of their wheat, and steal that so that we impose permanent famine on the people of Syria. And it is a tragedy. It is a moral disgrace. And I hope Trump tried to pull us out of Syria 3 times and was met by an effective rebellion by the deep state. I think it's something that certainly warrants close examination.
Thank you, Colonel Black. Helga, I see your hand is raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask Senator Black. I mean, obviously, the first step to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people would be to lift the Caesar sanctions.
Yes.
And, I would really hope that, something could happen with the new Trump administration in this respect. And related to that, obviously, when General Flynn in 2012 wanted to brief Obama, President Obama at the time, about, that the United States was backing the wrong people in Syria and in other countries of the region, Obama didn't want to hear it. And when President Trump was trying to make General Flynn his security advisor, this was, causing a huge storm. But maybe this could be remedied now by, opening the files on. I mean, this is a whole hornet's nest, which would lead to a lot of things which went wrong in the recent period. So, what do you think about this?
I certainly hope so. You hit the nail on the head with the Caesar sanctions, and if we lifted the blockade, it would bring peace to the remaining terrorists that control small parts of Syria, because frankly, everyone is so tired of war that if you gave young men the alternative of going out and rebuilding the apartments, the houses, either they could do that or they could go to war, everybody would lay down their weapons. I can tell you, because I literally had an intelligence network. It was very informal, but it was an effective intelligence network across Syria, and I knew what was happening. I knew the voice of the people from a wide range of individuals there, and I can just tell you that everyone on both sides is tired, and yet the U.S. through the Central Intelligence Agency has had unwavering support for Al-Qaeda in Syria. It's gone under different names. It was called al-Nusra through most of the times, and now it's something that's sort of unpronounceable. But to this day, we support Al-Qaeda in Syria, which holds one province of Syria, and the leader there is a man who has a $10 million bounty on him from the Treasury Department, and I think it's Treasury, but anyway, we have a bounty on his head, and yet we support the army that he runs. I mean, it's just part of the insanity that governs our involvement in Syria. And part of what goes on is there is this unified Western alliance media that is able to join, sort of link arms and propagate a false narrative whenever we decide to attack and destroy a country. And they did this with Syria. they started accusing President Assad, Bashar al-Assad, of gassing his own people. He was a lunatic who was gassing his own people. Not one journalist in hundreds of interviews ever asked the simple question: if President Assad were willing to employ poison gas, why would he not use it against the 12 mechanized divisions of ISIS and Al-Qaeda who are about to overthrow the whole country and kill all of the Christians, all of the Alawites? Why would he not use it against them and then turn around and choose to use it on women, mothers pushing their baby carriages down the street? Because once you ask that question, it is so irrational that anyone of ordinary sense would say, well, of course not. Nobody would ever do that. Why would he choose to employ poison gas in his own capital of Damascus instead of doing it in the capital of the ISIS caliphate out in Raqqa, I believe it was? And no journalist ever dared to ask these questions. And the reason is, don't imagine for a minute there weren't hundreds of journalists who thought about this. But they knew if you just once asked that unanswerable question, your career in the mainstream media would be over. Your name would be mud for life. And so this censorship of the mainstream media has propelled the American people into wars that are counterproductive. It has prevented us from waging peace, from trying to come up with solutions rather than something other than bombing and so forth. But yeah, the issue of Syria is a very, very real one. And I think what we do to Syria, what we did to Libya, we launched an unprovoked invasion of Libya, which is why I started studying all of this. And we were going to spread democracy, and we have barred them from conducting free and fair elections ever since we invaded in 2011. The reason is because Saif Gaddafi, who is one of the sons of Muammar Gaddafi, is wildly popular in the country, and we do not want him to be elected as president. So we simply ban elections. And so we've got competing governments over there. And what was once the premier nation of all of Africa, enormously stable, profitable, now it's simply left in disarray, bombed out, a disaster area. What did we do once we took it over? Did we do anything to resurrect and bring it back? Not at all. Not at all. We looted the treasury. We took 214 tons of gold, 2,000 tons of silver that simply vanished. And where did they go? Nobody ever explained. And then we looted the armories of Libya and sent those weapons over to Turkey, and we put them into a series of CIA warehouses on the Syrian border, and we then dispersed those weapons into Syria to arm the terrorist movement that waged war and continually tried to overthrow the legitimate elected government in Damascus.
Thank you so much, Senator Black, Colonel Black, for your excellent analysis This was very important, and I'm sure many of us will want to actually take this snippet out of what you've said and get it out and use it in our organizing. So thank you so much, Colonel Black, for everything that you do. We shall continue with our agenda. Next, we have Glenn Diesen, who this is actually a video statement from him. He was at the Valdai Club, which is the 21st annual Valdai discussion in Russia. And he was at that and had the opportunity to make a number of remarks on this for us. So if we can pull up that video from Glenn Diesen. He's
I know that you recently were at the Valdai Discussion Club in Russia, and you had an opportunity to have a dialogue with Russian President Putin on the question of the BRICS and creating a new order that is not a zero-sum game and is not the world divided into different blocks, which of course is what leads to global war. And you raised the question with President Putin of how could you extend the BRICS to Europe, which has been caught up in this us versus them military conflict. So would you like to speak about that and about the discussions that you saw at the Valdai conference around this question of what would a new security and development order look like?
Yeah, sure. Well, my role was to a large extent provide a summary for a panel which I moderated to President Putin, and also I added a question to it. As you mentioned, I very much agree that I think the source of our conflicts in Europe is that we never overcame the bloc system. Again, this was our ambition at the end of the Cold War, but we never followed through. And a key part of this reason was this push for hegemony, which manifested itself as NATO expansion. Now, in the rest of the world, though, they're not embracing the bloc politics. Most countries appear to prefer multipolarity simply because it enables a multi-vector foreign policy where small and medium states also get a voice simply because they're not subordinated as pawns in blocs. Instead, they diversify their economic connectivity, enabling them to have a more autonomous, if not even independent, foreign policy. So for me, this BRICS initiative, it's very successful. So of course, this is what I wanted to hear with Putin, whether or not this can be extended to Europe. In other words, ideally, BRICS would not be in a bloc of its own, which is anti-Western. I very much think it's reasonable that it's anti-hegemonic, but it shouldn't go against the US. It should go against the US empire. That is, but again, this is what I was curious. Has Russia left the door open for the West to come through if when the hegemonic aspirations begin to fall apart, will there be an opportunity to construct some kind of multipolar system where the West can also be a part of? Because the alternative, of course, would be that we might end up with a block system. And I was quite optimistic about his response, as he obviously has suggested that this is the way Russia should go.
Well, we took note, our organization, of a comment that Putin made when he was asked about the question of multipolarity. And he used the term polyphonic, as in music, where many voices come together into a one. And in the polyphonic Western musical tradition, going back to Bach and developing through Beethoven, which continued up through Brahms, this tradition of creating many voices against each other in counterpoint, leading to a higher one, we think is extremely important for creating an order of many voices which can discuss what is the higher principles of such a new order.
Well, I think this is an important part of multipolarities because it contrasts with unipolarity. Keep in mind when there's unipolarity, with one center of power, then the role of that one center of power is effectively to represent all powers, to represent universal ideals. So if others disagree with you, it's simply because they haven't been socialized towards your higher ideals. So we see that this has corrupted even the concept of diplomacy, because what is diplomacy now? It means you have the civilizational teacher, which would be the collective West, trying to socialize the rest of the world, which will be the students, into our own universal values. So this diminishes the scope or the possibility for even diplomacy, because if you have diplomacy in such a system, it means that our good values would have to compromise with their bad values. So in such a hierarchy, you can only have one voice. Now, in contrast, in a multipolar system, we dismiss the concept of universalism in terms of one center of power claiming the right to present universal values. This is, again, from Roman Empire to the United States. That's how you legitimize hegemony. So, as the Chinese, Indians, as well as the Russians, for that sake, argue, is every civilization has its own path to development. It has its own history, its own unique geography, and it's not for other powers to dictate how they should develop. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have common values, but the main idea is what does diplomacy look like now? How do states engage if we all have our different civilizations? Is this division? No, it doesn't have to be, and this is the whole point. Now it's very imperative that you have this dialogue of civilization, and of course I heard many different analogies. A scholar named Andrei Kortunov, he compared political diversity to biological diversity. That is, any system which has a greater diversity has more ability to absorb certain blows. You can experiment with different things. Again, these are not new ideas. This was the ancient Greek states to the founding of the American Republic, which was very decentralized, the whole idea that you had many different states which can pursue different approaches to governance, economy, philosophy, and it's this trial and failure and emulating what works and discarding what doesn't work, that this works better in a system with many centers of power. But for this to work, for it not to be one of conflict and chaos, to instead have one of cooperation, it is necessary to have cooperation between these different powers. And I think to a large extent, that's also what they try to do now at Valdai. They bring, again, at Valdai, the Russians are in a minority. Most people who attend there now are foreigners. They are foreign military, political leaders, academics. And the whole purpose is to have this civilizational discussion. If you want, I like the analogy of the music, because of course it's the music is better when it all comes together, which is some of these arguments for this civilizational diversity. I think at least that's the direction he was going with it. That this era, that the Washington will play his flute and everyone will dance accordingly. That this is over. That we have to now find a way of accommodating other voices as well. And I think this is good. We should take the Russians on this challenge, because through history, a key concern in Western Europe has been that the Russians will be imperialist and dictate to others. Now, if they want to have an international system where others can also be heard, all other states, wonderful. Wouldn't that solve our concerns as well? So I think it was a good approach.
Well, in order to pull together this idea of the West cooperating with the BRICS in such a new order, instead of a conflict which could obviously lead to nuclear war, Helga LaRouche of the Schiller Institute has written and circulated a proposed 10 principles of a new security and development architecture. Because the question is, how do you pull this musical chorus or orchestra together? What are the universal principles that can cross various cultural lines of many different countries, and especially in a crisis where the system has to be reorganized? Is the 10th principle she put forward was one of the most controversial, that many people disagreed with us, which is that man is inherently good, that he is not evil who needs a sort of dictatorship, a leviathan to control and manipulate, but that man, if developed by culture and by creativity, can transform the universe for the better. And therefore, if knowing that man is good, if we provide everyone with education and culture, we can create a whole new order of humanity where there is no empire.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the assumption we often have in the West, the need to have a dominant military bloc in order to hold everyone in line. I think a lot of this comes from our experiences from Europe, which has been always to be immersed in this bloc politics, and we never tried to look beyond it. Because if you look what they're doing already in this greater Eurasian spaces, they're having multipolarity, creating incentives for countries to do exactly this, to fight poverty, to resolve their political differences, simply because they're all benefiting if they can connect more with each other. And you also have the systemic incentives to avoid aggression and coercion. That is, I always make the point, if the Chinese began to throw their weight around too heavily or be too abusive, try to intrude on other sovereignty, then you would probably see, imagine if they did this towards India or Russia, then they would begin to reduce their dependence on the Chinese technologies, on their supply chains, on their corridors, on their banks and currency, etc. So it's but the Chinese haven't done this because they also notice, they realize it's in their interest to harmonize their interest and to build trust with others. This is very different from the bloc system, because in a bloc politics you have an incentive to always perpetuate conflict, to make sure that your allies remain obedient and loyal, while your adversaries would be weakened. So there's this incentive to always perpetuate conflict.
I'd just like to thank Professor Glenn Diesen, for his remarks and for sending this in on the Valdai conference. This was a very important discussion and dialogue process that's going on, which is in the general BRICS dynamic. So thank you very much, Mr. Diesen, for this. Next, I'd like to go to another long-term friend of our grouping here, Mike Robinson, who is the co-editor of the UK column, and actually probably many people from Britain who are on right now on the IPC know exactly who you are. So welcome, Mike Robinson.
Thank you. I think I'm going to start just by covering a little bit of, hinting a little bit of what Colonel Black was saying there about the role of the mainstream media in the press, in the war narrative and so on. And he was talking about Syria, and Syria is a great example of how the mainstream media pursued a particular narrative without that, with respect to that country. So, and the process began actually many years before the conflict in Syria began. A small organization linked to the BBC, but mostly funded by the Foreign Office of the UK, called BBC Media Action, is what's described as a media development organization. And so it is responsible for going into countries around the world, bringing the BBC editorial standards, the BBC way of doing things, and training journalists in countries of interest. And Syria was one of those from about 2004. And they specifically admitted to wanting to particularly work with people who were in opposition to the Syrian government. So they're looking for people that were going to be campaigning against Assad and so on. And they worked with them for many years, developing a media capability within Syria. And then when the Syrian conflict kicked off, and the Western media wanted to speak to people, inverted commas, on the ground, who were supposedly voices, who were simply grassroots commentators of what was going on. It was never declared in the Western media that these people had been trained by BBC Media Action or perhaps Thomson Reuters Foundation. I've no idea whether Thomson Reuters Foundation ever directly operated in Syria, but certainly they operate in other countries doing a similar job. And so what we have there is the British Foreign Office funding a media development program in a foreign country in order to develop narratives in that foreign country which are sympathetic to the British Foreign Office policy for that country, which in this case was regime change. One of the other things that, so it became a sort of revolving door with people then being used to then bring that Western aligned narrative back into Western countries, the UK, the EU, the United States, in order to justify the action, that justify the calls for regime change in Syria and to demonize the Assad government. So it's quite a clever way that they do that, but we've got to be aware that that's what they're doing, because otherwise we can't really make a judgment on whether what we're hearing from these countries is real or not. So yes, the next thing I was going to mention was my colleague Vanessa Bailey, who lives in Damascus at the moment. You know, the other thing that Colonel Black said was, if mainstream journalists say things which are not following the editorial line that they're expected to take, then it's effectively the end of their careers. Vanessa has spoken to several of, particularly the British journalists that have been operating in Syria over the years. And it's clear from those conversations that they do recognize that what they are presenting on the evening news program is not even close to being actually correct. So they do understand what they're doing, and that I think is something that we should be aware of as well. Now, it's interesting that with the election of Donald Trump, some of the things that he has been saying in recent days with respect to mainstream media should perhaps give us some encouragement that we might see some changes in this area, not only with his outright attack on the US media, but also his determination, or at least his stated determination so far, that he will make sure that the various online platforms are reversing their censorship policies, at least with respect to the United States. In the UK and in the EU, it may be more difficult because we have legislation in place already to make sure that the platforms are fairly censorious. So we'll see how that plays out in the coming months. But in the UK, not only this current regime of Keir Starmer, but the previous Conservative government was absolutely clear that we need to protect the mainstream press. They were recognizing that the mainstream press has major financial problems, that their advertising revenue has collapsed as a result of the move to digital. And they are very concerned that their mouthpiece, effectively their way of trying to control narratives and public opinion, is in danger. So the previous UK government set up an inquiry, a review into what they could do to protect mainstream media. And one of the things that they have done since that review is to fund mainstream media directly through direct advertising. They are also making sure that they protect the mainstream media through the legislation that they have passed in order to try to limit the reach of anybody that's pushing out a narrative which isn't suitable as far as the government is concerned. So just a couple of weeks ago, Keir Starmer published an article in The Guardian called "Journalism is the Lifeblood of British Democracy. My government will protect it." So he is doing that by enforcing the Online Safety Act, which I've talked about on the LaRouche programs on Saturday evenings several times over the last couple of years. But in parallel with that, then we have seen the massive use of the terrorism legislation in the UK to shut down dissenting voices and to arrest a range of people that are particularly pursuing a pro-Palestine, trying to get the word out on what is actually going on in Palestine. And because Hamas is a proscribed organization in the UK, the terrorism legislation is being used to shut these people down, to seize their computers, to make sure that they cannot continue to speak out in an effective way. So the legislation that the government is using to mainly control speech on the internet is the Online Safety Act. There's Digital Services Act in the EU. There are various, in fact, the UK and the United States have just announced a sort of collaboration on online safety. On both the United States side and in the UK, the notion of protecting children is the main cover that they're using for their censorship regime. And in the UK, the legislation itself was passed a year ago, having taken, I think, 6 years to get to that point. But even though the legislation was passed a year ago, it hasn't actually come into force yet. It will come into force in about 5 weeks' time, just before Christmas. One of the aspects of this was a concern from the British government that legislation that requires platforms like Facebook and Twitter and so on to behave in a certain way would have a detrimental effect on the mainstream media. So they wrote into that legislation clauses which protect what they describe as news publisher and journalistic content. So they have created a specific requirement on the platforms to exclude what they describe as recognized news publisher content from any of the censorship regime. Not only are they required to exclude journalistic content from that regime, but they are also, there's a clause in the Online Safety Act which talks about false communications. And it says that if a person sends a message and the message conveys information that the person knows to be false at the time of sending it, then that the person intended to send that false message, that they are then in breach of the law and subject to criminal sanction, which could be including imprisonment. But they specifically wrote into the legislation that anybody that is considered to be a recognized news publisher cannot commit an offense of false communications. So the mainstream media can continue to push out their pro-war narratives. They can continue to demonize leaders of foreign countries with impunity and without any risk of sanction whatsoever. So this is clearly an extremely dangerous thing. On one level, where there is perhaps some scope for hope in the UK, at least, is that the definition in the law for what a recognized news publisher is extremely it's not terribly difficult to meet the requirements. They basically require you that you are some kind of formal organization, limited company, or something like that. That you have a business address, that you have an editorial policy, that you have a complaints procedure, and that you have a standards code. They don't require in the legislation that you have signed up to any of the government sanctioned regulatory bodies. And so actually there is a lot of scope for smaller independent media organizations who are perhaps more willing to consider challenging the state on their narratives there's scope for those types of organizations to make use of this legislation in order to challenge the censorship regime that we're seeing. So we have launched a campaign to encourage independent media organizations in the UK to get together with us, and we don't actually care what their particular political position would be or which side of the political spectrum they might be on, because this is an issue that everybody is having to deal with, and so we are encouraging everybody to get together with us to challenge this. Whether that will result in some kind of legal action, we don't know yet, but that is something that we're doing at the moment. We won't be able to formally take any action until we see what the regulator is going to actually do, and that we won't know that until after Christmas. And we'll keep everybody informed as to what's happening there. But you know, what we have is a situation that the platforms absolutely being required on this side of the Atlantic to censor content which goes against government narratives. We'll see what happens with Donald Trump and what, as far as the United States is concerned, and how successful he is and his administration is in dealing with mainstream media and the censorship regime in the platforms on that side of the Atlantic. But we certainly intend to bring the fight to the platforms if we possibly can. So that's about it for now.
Thank you, Mike, for all of that and for what you're doing in Great Britain. I can't imagine this is a very easy battle, kind of being in the belly of the beast here of a lot of pretty nefarious things in the world.
Yeah.
So thank you for your fight and your bravery in doing this and unifying people across the spectrum, because we really got to get over all of this. We've got to unite ourselves to shut this thing down. So thank you so much. And we will be going to our discussion period. There is a ton of questions that are coming in. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions in. If you want to participate in the live dialogue process, you must RSVP, you must get the Zoom link. RSVP to get the Zoom link. You can find that RSVP link inside of the YouTube description. If you are not on YouTube right now, please go to the schillerinstitute.com and you will see the IPC meeting registration page. So I'll just give people a minute to go find that. And the people who are currently on the Zoom, if you'd like to participate in this discussion, please just choose the raise hand option. We are opening that up very soon. And you can find that raise hand option on the bottom of your screen. But otherwise, we will be cutting the stream off right now. Just let me know, Dave, when that's done.